Good morning, everyone. I'm Christine Simmon, Senior Vice President for Policy and Strategic Alliances at the Association for Accessible Medicines and the Executive Director of the Biosimilars Council. Thank you all for joining us for this special Women in Health Policy, or WIP, Healthcare Leaders event. For those of you who are new to WIP, it is a network powered by AAM that we formed about 2 years ago with the aim of increasing the number of women guiding our nation's healthcare and amplifying their effectiveness and professional advancement. And now we are 700 strong. We host networking and professional development sessions throughout the year, both virtual and in person, to give women in health policy the opportunity to learn from and network with each other. We also have an active LinkedIn presence with upcoming WIP events like today's, plus relevant articles, job postings, and other useful information to share across the health policy sector. So please be sure to look us up and join us there if you're not already part of our online forum. I'm very excited to be moderating today's session, Advancing the Roles of Women in Politics, Policy, and Business, which is part of our new Healthcare Leaders series. The purpose of this series is to give our attendees the opportunity to hear firsthand from healthcare's most influential female executives and accomplished leaders who have leapt over barriers and created their success. These leading women will share stories and lessons learned from their climb to the top. And I'm so very pleased today to be joined by our inaugural guest, Congresswoman Ann McLane Kuster of New Hampshire's 2nd District. Representative Kuster was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2012 and is one of the most well-respected members of Congress. She serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee as well as its Health Subcommittee, making her one of the key experts driving health policy today. She also speaks of legislating in a deeply purple district, meaning that she is one of the strongest voices pushing for bipartisan work on healthcare, balancing the budget, and improving the economy. She's the co-founder and co-chair of 2 bipartisan task forces, the Bipartisan Addiction and Mental Health Task Force and the Bipartisan Task Force to End Sexual Violence. Congresswoman is an outspoken advocate for bringing more women to Congress across the country and has taken on multiple roles both at home and in New Hampshire and in Washington to recruit, encourage, and elect more women to office. She's a leader in the powerful New Democrat Coalition, a large coalition of pro-economic growth, fiscally responsible Democrats. She drives the critical economic and policy messages home to her peers. Welcome, Congresswoman. I'll turn it over to you now for any remarks before we dive into questions.
Well, Christine, that was lovely. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful for that kind introduction. And I'm so excited to hear about your new group. I have been working in healthcare policy for close to 30 years. I did a lot of public policy advocacy work in my legal practice in New Hampshire. And most of my clients were healthcare providers and people affiliated with the healthcare sector. So this is a continuation of my work. I'm so honored to serve on the Health Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. And just very excited. One of the things, frankly, that I have enjoyed over the past 30 years about my work in healthcare policy is the number of women in the field. I feel as though women have done very well in the healthcare field, and particularly with regard to public policy advocacy. And I've had many, many friends and mentors in the field, so I'm excited to hear about your group and obviously very honored to be your first guest.
Well, thank you so much, Congresswoman. Your work on the Energy and Commerce's Health Subcommittee drives much of the policy, including drug pricing. In fact, you're the lead Democrat on the bipartisan Ensuring Access to Lower Cost Medicines for Seniors Act, which has the potential to save seniors just over $4 billion in out-of-pocket costs annually. We at AAM, we're big proponents of generics and biosimilars, and that is our mission to deliver access to patients and the mission of our members. We're very grateful, and we thank you for your leadership on this bill. Can you tell us a little bit about it and your approach to evaluating these types of legislation?
Sure. And this bill is particularly special because it's such a bipartisan bill. Working with my colleague, Mr. McKinley, he and I have worked on a number of healthcare related bills. We have similar districts, and so we see the world in a similar way. So, what the tiering bill, and your listeners are probably familiar with the concept of price tiering in prescription medication and biosimilars. What we're trying to do is make sure that the consumer gets the greatest possible savings. And so we tier a lower cost generic tier where that's the kind of go-to tier to make sure that they always get that generic or biosimilar medication at a lower cost. And then for specialty medications, we have a special tier, again, with the goal of savings for the consumer. You know, seniors really struggle. I mean, I can think back to a bill I worked on in the New Hampshire state legislature about making sure we had medication available to seniors. We actually created a program in New Hampshire that still exists called the Medication Bridge, where people could get access to the patient assistance programs that pharmaceutical companies offer. So it's been a strong goal of mine for decades to make sure that seniors have access to the medication that's so meaningful for their health and well-being, frankly.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Congresswoman. You know, one thing that stands out to me in your career is that you seem to be always among the firsts. We mentioned you're our first guest today for our leadership program here, but in fact, you were part of one of the first classes of Dartmouth students that included women. That must have been something. And you continued that streak of firsts by being part of the first all-female congressional delegation in history. How have these experiences shaped your approach to policymaking, and what role do your networks, both here in DC but also back home in New Hampshire, play in bringing more women to the table?
Well, let me quote my friend and our first female vice president of the United States. Kamala Harris has a wonderful quote: "I may be the first, but I won't be the last." And I think that's certainly been my approach as well. So yes, going off to Dartmouth College, an all male college for 200 years, and I was in the third class of women at age 18 back in the mid 70s. It was challenging. There were definitely challenges. And I think that experience has stood with me. I was one of the early female lawyers in New Hampshire. I think I was the first woman partner in a law firm to work part-time when I was raising my children. I had an 80% schedule. Of course, the women on this call can appreciate I had an 80% schedule and billed more than 100% of half of my male colleagues. So efficiency is key. But it's important to mentor and bring other women along. And I will say, serving in Congress, I have had the most extraordinary network of friends and colleagues supporting one another. There's a beautiful article just came out in the last couple of days about my roommate and dearest friend, Catherine Clark, our assistant speaker, and our good friend Grace Meng from New York, who just passed and yesterday was at the White House for the signing of the Asian American hate crime legislation. And we are very, very close. We talk to each other. We're texting all day long. Sherry Bustos, Julia Brownlee, Lois Frankel, Grace and Catherine and me. And we support each other. And we're all moms. What we have in common, we've all raised sons. And Grace has the youngest boys coming along. But we care a lot about public policy and we care a lot about women's voices being at the table. And so that's the most important piece for me is the camaraderie, the support, and then mentoring women, encouraging candidates to run for office and mentoring our colleagues to make sure that they can win their elections and be effective here in Congress.
Well, you mentioned the winning of elections, and it's remarkable that over the last two Congresses, we have seen a record number of women run for higher office and win those offices. How has this increased presence of women changed the conversation on politics and policy?
Well, what I think is special about the way women legislate is they bring their whole history, they bring their whole self to the issues at hand. And I'll give you a couple of very recent examples in our committee. I got involved in addiction policy because of the opioid epidemic in my district in New Hampshire. But in the course of that, my own brother out on the West Coast had a series of surgeries that involved opioid medication and ended up having to go into treatment and recovery himself. And so our whole family has been dealing with that. Then later, I had a niece who lost a baby tragically to sudden unexplained death syndrome, a beautiful 6-month-old baby girl. And so I got involved in legislation in our committee on research about sudden infant death. And then most recently, I have a niece who has long COVID. And I've been talking with Dr. Fauci and involved in the research for research and treatment of Americans with long COVID. And what I learned early on is that if I share these personal experiences, I have a better chance of, number one, educating my colleagues, but number two, really connecting with the public and creating effective advocacy that can make a difference. And so I'm trying to encourage my male colleagues, and I want to give a shout out to people like David Trone, Brian Fitzpatrick, my colleague Jamie Herrera Butler. Those are my co-chairs on our mental health and addiction task force, and they have been very willing to share personal stories themselves. My friend Debbie Dingle is very good at this, sharing personal stories, and I think it does make a difference. You see it in Speaker Pelosi. When she talks about children, she always comes back to children. And she knows from raising her own 5 kids, raising her own grandchildren, life is complicated. It's hard. And we need public policy that is supportive to hardworking American families.
Congresswoman, I'm hearing a consistent theme of connection and the value of connection. And yet we've never been in a more bitterly divided partisan environment. And you're often praised for your highly collaborative approach in this hyper-partisan environment. And you often talk about what it's like to legislate for a deeply purple district. Being a member in New Hampshire, where anyone with aspirations for higher office makes an appearance, you see the future and direction of politics long before the rest of the country begins paying attention. So how do you navigate that climate?
Well, let me unpack that. There are 2 parts. One is the current climate that we're in here in the Capitol. And I will certainly tell you this has been the most challenging, 5 months of my career and of my life. So I was involved in the incident, the insurrection of January 6th. I was up in the gallery in the chamber of the House, and it was harrowing. We could hear the pounding of the insurrectionists on the door. I was with a group of members that were the last to be evacuated. And frankly, we all thought we were going to die. It was terrifying. And so to come back to working together with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle is very challenging in those circumstances. What I try to do and what I've always done is look for allies, look for people that I can trust, that I've mentioned John Katko, Brian Fitzpatrick, Jamie Herrera Butler. These are people that I know their districts are similar to mine and their values are similar to mine. And they want to uphold our democracy. They want to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th. How did that intelligence lapse, and how were we left so exposed to insurrectionist attack here in the Capitol. So I look for common ground. And then now the other part of your question was working in New Hampshire in a purple district and welcoming presidential candidates. I had a wonderful year. 2020 was truly an extraordinary experience. Pre-COVID, I had the opportunity in 2019 and 2020 to welcome all the Democratic candidates to New Hampshire. And I just took the approach that I wanted everyone to feel kindly welcome. That's a Shaker expression that we use in their journey to New Hampshire to explore presidential candidacy. So I did events with Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg, and the list goes on. And my goal was to celebrate our democracy, to make sure that my constituents had the opportunity to meet these candidates. And when you talked in your question about seeing into the future, what I see is the value of diversity, the value of inclusion in our society, the fact that we had such an extraordinary group of candidates that brought their life experience, whether it's growing up female, growing up of mixed race, growing up Black, growing up Asian, growing up gay, all of these different experiences. And yet what they brought to the table was leadership. They brought an inclusive, respectful style of leadership. And I see it right now: Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg, Cory Booker, my good friend Deb Haaland, Secretary of Interior. All of these people are demonstrating the value of diversity and inclusion in our society. And now when I talk to people in the business sector, corporate people, I say, would you want to run your company on half the brain power? You know, the reality is that the corporate sector has discovered this, that companies are more successful, more vibrant when they include everyone's perspective. And so that's my goal. And frankly, it's a beautiful future. I think I look back on January 6th as sort of an inflection point of these white supremacists attacking our Capitol in a kind of a last gasp, if you will, and that it's up to people like me and my colleagues to stand strong for our democracy right now at this moment in history, and to embrace inclusion, embrace diversity, and embrace the extraordinary economy and, more importantly, society that we can build together.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, Congresswoman Kuster. And, you know, you're certainly an incredible role model, not just for women, but for anyone who aspires to the kind of leadership that you are providing, not just for New Hampshire, but for the nation. And I guess I just have one more question, because, of course, women in health policy is about helping more women reach their aspirations. And so what do you think we can do now to cultivate more female leaders in politics, policy, business, and really wherever they want to lead?
So I think mentoring is really, really important. We've learned a lot from a group called Emily's List here in Washington about women candidates. There's a lot of research at Rutgers about what it takes for women to run for office. And one very interesting data point is that women have to be asked 7 times to run for office before they consider diving in. And I will say I have plenty of male colleagues who just wake up in the morning and brushing their teeth, they look in the mirror and see a congressman. So I want to be the person that asks women, including women on this call, to please consider running for elected office, whether it's running for school board, running for city council, running for your town select board, or whether it's running for state legislature or for Congress. And what I've tried to do is reach out and support women candidates, teaching them about fundraising, about networking. I used to joke that I had an overused Rolodex, but now my staff is so young they don't know what a Rolodex is. So now I have to refer to my contacts. But, you know, keep track of people, stay in touch with people. I ran for Congress on my mother's Christmas card list. My mother was a state senator for 25 years in New Hampshire in the state House and Senate. And she had passed away when I ran, but I found her old, hers was a Rolodex, and I wrote them all a letter and said, I'm running for Congress. And I got incredible support. It was like fundraising from heaven. So stay in touch with people. You know, you will never know when your college roommate will come through for you or your high school friends. But encourage people to run. And that's what I'm doing both at the state and local level and here in Washington, recruiting women candidates, mentoring women candidates, and mentoring our colleagues who ran for Congress and are changing certainly the makeup, but the dynamic here in Congress. I came in when I think we were about 20% of Congress was female, and now in my caucus, we're close to half, almost half, and I think across the board, we're probably somewhere in the 30% range. So we want to encourage people, encourage women and people of different backgrounds to run and have your voice heard. You need a seat at the table. If you're not at the table, you might be on the menu. So join me, and I'd love to help you in that.
Well, Congresswoman Kuster, thank you so much for being part of this important discussion, for being so generous with your time. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, and we're very grateful for your insights on these health policy and leadership issues. Hopefully, we'll have you at an upcoming Women in Health Policy event in person, maybe, so you can see our network in action and meet some of our very inspiring members. And for those of you tuning in online, thank you for your continued engagement and for being a part of our ever-growing WIP community. We will be posting this video on our LinkedIn page, and we hope that you will share and comment and engage and continue to foster these important professional relationships. Thank you.